In the darkest corners of medieval France, some punishments were far worse than a swift execution. These were punishments designed not just to end a life, but to erase a memory, no grave, no marker, no name left behind, to whisper through history. One of these horrors was reserved almost exclusively for women, those accused of the most unforgivable sins. It was called immurement. To be sealed alive inside a wall, left to starve, suffocate, and fade away into absolute silence. And yet, in the year 1314, in the ancient city of Rouen, one woman's voice refused to disappear. This is the story of what happens when the walls themselves begin to speak. Her name was Alex. She was a novice, barely 18 years old, devout and desperate. She had entered the hallowed walls of the monastery not just for God, but to escape the hunger and endless wars that ravaged the countryside. She sought sanctuary, but found a prison of rules tighter than iron, where every glance was judged and every whisper could be a death sentence. Then came the night that sealed her fate. One single accusation, spoken in shadows. They claimed she had broken her sacred vows, a mortal sin that could not be tolerated. There was no witness to come forward, no trial to weigh the evidence. There were only whispers that slithered through the cold stone corridors, and a decision that had been made long before she was even told. The Church, in its infinite wisdom, called it an act of mercy. They argued that a public execution would stain the sacred soul of the monastery with blood. Immurement, however, was different. It was clean. It was quiet. It was a way to make a problem simply vanish. Alex was not to be killed. She was to be forgotten. And so the preparations began. As the first light of dawn broke over Rouen, the entire monastic community was summoned, not to a public square, but to an isolated, disused part of the holy grounds. There was no jeering crowd, no baying for blood. There was only the oppressive silence of stone walls and the sight of dozens of lowered eyes, afraid to meet hers. Alex was led into a narrow, unfinished corridor, a place she had never seen before. It smelled of damp earth and finality. At the very end of this passage stood a gap in the wall, a hollow space waiting to be filled. Beside it, the masons stood with their tools, their faces grim and unreadable. The air was thick with unspoken dread. She felt her knees on the cold flagstones. The weight of her fate crashed down upon her, and she began to pray, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate plea to a God who seemed to have abandoned her. She cried, not with quiet tears, but with deep, gut-wrenching sobs that echoed in the confined space. And she swore her innocence, screaming it until her voice grew raw and broken. "I am innocent," she rasped, over and over again. "Before God, I am innocent." A few of the younger monks turned away, unable to watch. One, a man who had perhaps known her, took a half-step forward as if to speak, to object. But a single icy glance from the abbot froze him in his tracks. He lowered his head in submission. The protest died on his lips. There would be no intervention. Then, with a dull thud, the first brick was laid in place, mortared into the opening. Her tomb was being built one brick at a time, right before her eyes. With each brick that was set, the sliver of light from the corridor shrank, and the air inside her small prison grew thinner, heavier. The scent of wet mortar filled her nostrils, a sickeningly sweet smell of burial. Her screams, once powerful, turned into hoarse, desperate pleas. She pounded on the growing wall with her fists. "Please," she begged the silent figures on the other side. "Have mercy. I am innocent." Her voice became a muffled cry, then a faint whimper. The masons worked with grim efficiency, their movements precise and practiced. They did not look at the wall they were building. They looked only at their hands, at the mortar at the next brick. Finally, the last stone was pushed into place. The final gap was sealed. A mason scraped the excess mortar smooth, erasing the seams, making it one with the rest of the ancient wall. Darkness and silence enveloped Alex completely. Outside, a priest stepped forward and blessed the newly completed wall, chanting prayers to purify the space and contain the sin within. The corridor was then locked and barred. The ordeal was over. The monastery, and everyone in it, returned to their duties, to the familiar rhythm of prayers and silence, or so they thought. The silence they craved would not last. Days turned into a week. A young nun, tasked with cleaning the passageways, was walking past the now forbidden corridor when she froze. She heard a sound. It was faint, barely audible, a soft, rhythmic tap coming from the other side of the door. She held her breath, listening. Another knock followed, then another, and then a whisper. So faint it was like a ghost on the wind. "Let me out," she fled, her heart hammering against her ribs. But she wasn't the only one. Soon, others heard it too. At night, during the deepest hours of silence, several of the sisters heard the sounds. Soft, persistent knocking from within the sealed-off section. Sometimes it was followed by the muffled sound of prayers, the same Latin verses they themselves recited daily, spoken by a voice that seemed to come from inside the very stone of the monastery. Fear began to curdle the piety of the community. The story of the sound spread in hushed, terrified whispers. The abbot could no longer ignore it. The bishop was informed. His response was swift and absolute. The corridor leading to the wall was to be permanently sealed. The door was bricked up, creating a wall behind a wall. He issued a stern decree. All discussion of the matter was forbidden on pain of severe penance. Silence, he commanded, is obedience to God. And so, a second layer of stone and silence was imposed. Centuries rolled by. The story of Alex and the Whispering Wall faded from memory into forgotten legend. Wars came and went. Kings rose and fell. The Protestant Reformation swept through France, and the monastery itself fell into ruin. Its stones repurposed, its history buried. The wall, however, remained untouched, a silent monument to a forgotten horror, until the year 1892. During a massive restoration project to turn the crumbling ruins into a museum, a team of laborers stumbled upon something strange. They were working from old blueprints, but they found a section of solid wall where a corridor should have been. There was no record of it, no explanation for its existence. Puzzled, the foreman gave the order to break through. With heavy sledgehammers and pickaxes, they began their work. The outer wall crumbled, revealing the original sealed doorway. Still intact after more than 500 years. They broke through that as well, their tools echoing in the long-abandoned passageway at the end of the corridor. They found it, the seamless, unmarked stretch of wall from the legend. Curiosity now mixed with a strange sense of unease. They began to carefully dismantle it brick by brick, and what they found on the other side made the hardened laborer step back in stunned, horrified silence. Inside the wall was a small, hollow cavity barely large enough for a person to stand, and within it, a human skeleton. It was not lying down as in a gravi, but was fixed in a standing position, held upright by the narrowness of the space. The fingers of both hands were worn down to the bone, the phalanges scraped raw and splintered against the rough inner surface of the stone. Claw marks scarred the bricks all around it. The skull was tilted unnaturally upward, its jaw locked open, as if frozen in a final, unending scream that no one had heard. There was no coffin, no crucifix, no name, nothing to identify the person who had died in this stone cage. There was only the skeleton, the claw marks, and the profound, chilling silence of the tomb. Church records from 1314 say nothing more of Alex. There is no confession of guilt, no declaration of innocence. There is only the record of her entering the monastery. And then, nothing to... Her existence was erased, just as intended. The official history is one of silence. So we are left with a question that echoes through the centuries. If Alex was truly innocent, condemned by whispers and sealed away by fear, how many other voices were silenced in this way? How many other forgotten souls were sealed into the foundations of holy places? Their pleas for mercy, absorbed by the very stones that became their graves. What do you think they truly found behind that wall? Was it simply the tragic remains of a condemned woman? Or did they uncover something else? A story that refused to be buried forever. Tell us your theories in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more of history's darkest secrets, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thank you for watching.